It's fascinating how, during the very same slice of history, two of East Asia's giants, China and Japan, were figuring out their futures. And even though they were neighbors, they ended up creating two completely different societies. One was built on the smarts of scholars, and the other, well, that one was built on the sharpness of swords.
So that's the big question, right? How does that even happen? How do you get a reborn empire right next to a warrior kingdom, and they just spin off onto these wildly different paths? Well, let's dive into the story of Ming China and feudal Japan and see if we can figure it out.
All right, let's start our journey in China. So, for about a century, they've been under the rule of the foreign Mongols. But the Chinese people rose up, kicked them out, and started a brand new era of their own. They called it the Ming Dynasty, which, by the way, literally means brilliant. To kind of get our bearings, just look at this timeline. So, 1368, that's the big one. The Ming Dynasty is founded, and the Mongols are out. This kicks off this incredible period of change. We're talking massive naval voyages in the early 1400s, and this huge project to rebuild the Great Wall. Now, one of the most amazing things about the Ming Empire was their civil service. They brought back this totally revolutionary system where your job in the government wasn't about who your dad was. Nope. It was about how smart you are. It was about merit. And believe me, this was no easy path. If you wanted to be an official, you had to spend years studying complex Confucian philosophy and then pass these incredibly tough exams. But if you made it, you got a government job. This created this amazing professional class of administrators who were loyal to the idea of the empire itself, not just their own families. And did they live up to that name, brilliant? Oh, absolutely. This was a golden age for arts and culture. The whole world was obsessed with their iconic blue and white porcelain. They built the stunning Forbidden City in Beijing, and their painting, literature, and even city planning were just on another level. Okay, so you're looking at this number, 7. What on earth could that be? Well, get this. That is the number of epic naval expeditions China launched into the Indian Ocean. And this was way before most European explorers had even thought about leaving their own coastlines. And here's the really important part. These gigantic fleets, led by an admiral named Zheng He, weren't about conquering new lands. Not at all. They were about showing off China's power, setting up diplomatic relationships, and boosting trade. It was basically a giant statement to the world about just how wealthy and advanced they were. Okay, now let's hop across the sea to Japan, because a totally different story was unfolding there. While China was busy building this huge, centralized empire run by scholars, Japanese society was being shaped by something else entirely. In Japan, the name of the game was feudalism. So unlike China's system based on smarts and exams, power in Japan was all about two things: land and military loyalty. It was a completely decentralized system where the real power was held by local lords. Think of their society like a strict pyramid. At the very top, you had the shogun. He was the real military and political boss. Under him were the daimyo, these powerful lords who controlled big chunks of land. And serving them were the legendary samurai warriors. And at the bottom, of course, were the peasants who worked the land. In this world, you were born into your role, and that was that. And the glue that held this whole warrior society together, it was a powerful code of conduct known as Bushido, which basically means the way of the warrior. Yeah, Bushido wasn't just some handbook for fighting. It was a whole philosophy for life. It was all about absolute, unwavering loyalty to your lord, valuing bravery and honor above literally everything else, and having this intense self-discipline. This code would go on to shape Japanese culture for centuries. So we've got these two totally different systems, right? One of scholars, one of warriors. But here is where their stories take this wild, surprisingly similar turn. Both of them, for their own reasons, decided that the best way to protect themselves was to just close the door to the rest of the world. For Japan, the threat came from the sea. By the early 1600s, the ruling shogunate became really suspicious of European traders and Christian missionaries. They saw them as a threat that could destabilize their entire society. And they didn't just sit on their hands. They took some pretty drastic steps. They kicked out the missionaries, they banned Christianity, and eventually, they shut down almost all foreign trade. Contact with the outside world was cut down to a tiny, tightly controlled trickle at a single port. And the results of that policy? Look at this number, 250. That's roughly how many years Japan spent in near total isolation. It actually brought a long period of peace and stability, but it also completely cut them off from everything that was happening in the rest of the world.
And what's incredible is that China basically made the same choice. Now, their big fear wasn't from the sea, it was from the north. They were terrified of another invasion from the steppes, just like the Mongols they had fought so hard to get rid of. And their response? To pour a staggering amount of resources into rebuilding and strengthening the Great Wall, their own powerful symbol of turning inward.
So after all that, what are the big takeaways here? What are the legacies that these two very different paths left behind? When you boil it all down, this is the fundamental split. Ming China's power came from a professional bureaucracy, a government of scholars chosen by their test scores. Feudal Japan's power came from a military aristocracy, where you inherited your status as part of a warrior class. And yet, and this is the really wild part, for all their profound differences in how they ran their societies, they both landed on the exact same conclusion. The best way to keep things stable and protect their culture was to just shut out the rest of the world. And that leaves us with this big, lingering question. This choice to isolate gave both nations these long stretches of peace and unique cultural growth. But it really makes you wonder, what was the long-term price they paid for stepping away from the global stage?